Hi everyone, Dom Famularo here, and I continue with the sessions. We have such great information that we're sharing from great artists from around the world. And today, TOSIN Abasi, thank you so much for joining us. Animals as leaders, I'm so excited to have you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
TOSIN, you really have an incredible story. I think what's exciting about it is the fact that you really are a self-taught guitarist who have built up this machine of entrepreneurial energy as a performer, designing guitars and what you've done, recording. This really is powerful, what you have built for yourself. And a part of what we do here at the Sessions panel is we really want to get people to understand about you, but also kind of how you built this machine. This is a lot about the business part of what's happening. Artistically, you are doing some phenomenal things, and it's very exciting, but the business side of how you build this and how you maintain this really is another part of the excitement. So let's just start from the beginning. What got you involved with music in the beginning stages? What brought you into this crazy industry?
I actually was part of the school orchestra, like in the third grade, I think. I played the clarinet for a few years. So that was my very first introduction into music. But I quickly realized that the music I was relating to didn't really have clarinets in it. So it was interesting. A friend of mine was taking guitar lessons, and I noticed his guitar in the living room, and I asked him to kind of show me a thing or two. And for some reason, like even that small interaction was compelling enough for me to want my own guitar. I was probably around 12 years old when I got my first guitar. So I just told my dad I wanted one, and we went and got like kind of like a Strat knockoff thing, none of us knew anything about guitar, how to tune it or anything, but basically, I just began the journey of learning whatever was on alternative rock radio or heavy rotation, MTV. And at that time, it was a lot of, it was like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and stuff like that. So that's my beginnings of guitar, was basically alternative rock, just self-teaching myself how to move power chords around.
Well, I love the fact, you had some musical training in school, so that was a part of you kind of stepping into the world of music.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I didn't really approach guitar by learning to read music. So on the clarinet, you're part of an orchestra, and so whatever line you're playing is obviously part of a larger melodic or chordal context. And when you're learning guitar, oftentimes it's very different than sitting and playing clarinet in an orchestra. So I think I understood rhythm intuitively, and then a little bit about music theory because of clarinet, but we didn't really go into the modes and various things like that. I was just reading whatever was on the sheet music. So the guitar felt really like its own beginning. I didn't feel like much of it transferred.
Well, it's kind of interesting. So when you say self-taught, you were just listening to music and kind of figuring it out on your own?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be into music that was pretty simple compared to the things I'm musically interested in now. So, if I wanted to learn a Weezer song or a Nirvana song, you take one chord shape and you essentially just move it around to various positions. And so I actually think I benefited from the fact that I was just trying to play alternative rock at the time, because I wasn't overwhelmed by a ton of musical complexity. It was pretty much like moving power chords around. So
it was a simpler way to kind of step into the world of guitar playing.
Yes, exactly. And you gain some basic facility and you gain some confidence. And then this was pre-internet, so luckily I wasn't aware of like the insane amount of musical ideas out there as far as, various music theory type things. And so I wasn't like overwhelming myself. I was able to kind of piece by piece build my ability to play.
I always get a kick out of how our instrument, for the most part, chooses us. And you felt comfortable with it, you start getting into it. So where was your first performance professionally, where all of a sudden now you're playing this instrument and you're in a band and you're starting to figure this out?
I had a little band with my brother Abdul. He played drums, and one of the kids in the neighborhood played bass, and we would get these local gigs, and we were all minors. My dad would have to drive us to these gigs, and we just do cover songs. So I don't know if that counts as, it's definitely not professional, but it was my first experience of having to work up a set and go on stage and perform and have everything go correctly. But eventually I started touring in a band called Reflux. We were signed to prosthetic records, and we actually did some international touring, and so I think that was my first taste of really leaving home for weeks at a time and like trying to make an income from performing.
Well, it's kind of interesting because you were also learning, I mean, and you know, about like a lot of these instructional videotapes that were out at that time.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because there was this like, basically if you turned on MTV at that time, you're gonna see, you weren't really seeing a lot of virtuoso guitar playing. It's kind of like the time shifted from the hair metal sort of virtuoso thing to Alice in Chains and this sort of grunge rock thing. That's when I got into guitar. But luckily, there was a music store called Washington Music Center, Chuck Levin's, and they had all these, great store.
I knew Chuck Levin very well. He was a great, great guy and had a great store down there. Absolutely.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So independent music store, and they had all these Hot Licks videos and REH videos. And so I would go in, I'd be that annoying kid who'd go in there and play all the expensive gear that he couldn't afford, you know, and like, but I guess they kind of liked me. And so they started to be like, hey, check this out. So they'd show me, you know, Paul Gilbert, you know, instructional video, or John Petrucci instructional, and then, you know, Sean Lane, and, you know, I got Steve Vai's Alien Love Secrets. He had like a VHS of like all these music videos from that album. And so I was kind of fortunate to have some influences there because they start to expose me to guys who weren't as readily seen in like, you know, just consuming whatever was on MTV. So yeah, I learned all this, I called it advanced technique, but it's, you know, sweep picking and alternate picking, and you know, I got an Yngwie Malmsteen video too, and I just remember just obsessing over getting faster and faster. So yeah.
Yngwie, what an incredible artist. I had a chance of performing with Yngwie many, many years ago. Incredible people. So you are now surrounding yourself with knowledgeable players that you were stealing from the best.
Yes, it's what you got to do. It's what you got to do, you know?
Absolutely.
I remember I got a Richie Kotzen video, and it was like things I had never seen executed on the guitar every time I got one of these videos. And it was just like, my brain was just expanding, and I just like, without question, just started to try to learn as much as possible from these guys.
Well, I love this kind of dedication, this kind of research, and this constant learning mentality. But here's what I thought was interesting, and tell me if this is true. When Prosthetic Records had approached you, they had heard you, you didn't want to do an album with them. You didn't think you were ready.
Yeah, I mean, the Reflux was a band, we were signed to Prosthetic Records, but we had a vocalist. And when they, Reflux broke up and Prosthetic had this idea of me putting out a solo effort, I just felt a little unsure that I could write an album without a vocalist and have it be compelling. And I was self-taught up until that point, other than these videos we're talking about. So I kind of declined, and it coincided with me going to the Atlanta Institute of Music. I learned a lot of things that made me feel more comfortable reapproaching the idea of doing a guitar instrumental album, you know what I mean? So I reapproached Prosthetic and said, hey, I actually think this could be a cool idea. Let's try it.
So how'd you feel now? Were you inspired? Was writing now becoming a part of your way of thinking?
I just realized that I could let go of it needing to sound like anything in particular, and that I reconceived of it as a instrumental project similar to, like, you know, certain moments of King Crimson, or Pat Metheny, you know, has a lot of albums where it's not jazz, it's more of his, like, the Pat Metheny band thing. And then also bands like Tortoise and even electronic music, Liquid Tension Experiment. I basically took it from, you know, the idea that it would be like the equivalent of a lead guitar line replacing a verse and a chorus, and I would treat it more like a instrumental band where the drummer's phenomenal and the bass, you know what I mean, all this. So it's like more of a project as opposed to like the TOSIN ABASI experience.
So I mean, this is what we're getting now into, is you're starting to see yourself as a brand. You're branding your sound and your world of influence in a certain way, and you're starting to, like a leader should, pull in great players that are now starting to assist you in your brand.
Yeah. Because I always liked the idea of a band being greater than the sum of its parts, and a lot of my favorite groups who were doing instrumental music, or in general, were composed of these powerhouses, right? So Chick Corea when he was playing with, Frank Gambale, or there's even times where Alan Holdsworth had like a essentially fixed lineup. You'd see Chad Wackerman on the drums or Vinny Colaiuta or whatever. And the Liquid Tension experiment, I think, was pretty powerful for me because I was already a Dream Theater fan, but it was cool that there was this other effort that was purely instrumental and everyone in the band was noteworthy. I just liked that approach to it because you could still hear all the amazing guitar work, but then also you're hearing amazing drumming and various amazing synth work. And to me, that just felt cooler than having like just like a meat and potatoes backing band situation with me doing all the fireworks or whatever.
And then you kind of evolve this into this instrumental progressive metal. This all of a sudden now you're kind of coming into your own at this point.
Yeah, because when it came to connecting with kids my age at the time, heavy music seemed to just be having a really strong community, especially for like playing shows locally and regionally. There was like a hardcore movement that I feel like used to be punk, and then it became more aggressive, and it wasn't quite metalcore yet, but it was like hardcore. You had bands like Hatebreed blurring the lines between, metal and hardcore. And so I was positioned right at that nexus to kind of play heavy music, but introduce some advanced guitar technique, but it wasn't straightforward heavy metal. It wasn't like we were playing like Iron Maiden style stuff. It was like a newer distillation of almost like hardcore new metal and progressive metal. Yeah, so I don't know.
Tell me about it, the Atlanta Institute of Music and Media. What was that like?
Yeah, AIM, Atlanta Institute of Music, is in Atlanta. It's cool. It's similar to Musicians Institute. You could do a focused musical curriculum. You didn't have to take like, English or, math. You could just do an university level musical instruction for a condensed period of time. So if you're a touring musician or something, you don't have to disappear for 4 years off the scene. You could go and do a 1 year or 2 year program and get this really condensed curriculum of useful musical information, and then you could get right back out to playing professionally. And at the time, that was really attractive to me because I had already been touring and I wasn't necessarily looking for a musical credential per se or anything like that. I just wanted to learn, a kind of a structured way. And so I did the 1 year program at AIM, and it was perfect.
You're working probably on many aspects of music production, media, everything is there, right?
Yeah, so they have expanded since I went. They have like production now, and they do, I think, vocal performance, bass, drums, and guitar. I was part of the guitar program, obviously. It was nice because there was classical guitar performance, there was rock performance, there was general music theory, so we're learning to read and write music, and there was like scales and soloing. So you learned a lot of, they would have Jimmy Herring come through at times, and he would drop these really awesome gems on how to expand your concepts while improvising. And so they made a point to have faculty who were actively touring or have, and the focus was towards gigging musicians or people who really like wanted to do it professionally. So it was really well curated. It was cool.
Well, that sounds very exciting. So what was it like, if I had to say to you, name me some guitar players that influence you, that you listen to, who would you name as far as some of those guitar player influences?
It's kind of a long list. I don't know if I'll remember everyone, but I'll try to think of the ones that stand out. I mean, and it also changes over time. So, I mean, I think earlier on, some of the guys we mentioned that I learned very foundational stuff from, like Paul Gilbert, was the first time I was really targeting alternate picking as like a really deliberate sort of science. And Greg Howe was a guy who I think was using his shred powers for melodic pursuits, and I really dug what he was up to. I remember discovering Frank Gambale's economy picking, and that really like took hold of me. I remember getting Steve Vai's Passion and Warfare, and it was this nexus of strong individual voice, and to the point where literally at times it sounded like he was emulating the human voice. And there was a degree of humor and like joy to it, but then it was also strong use of effects and also just this distinct playing style. So Vi had a huge influence on me. And then, John Petrucci, just as like a band member and as a virtuoso, he was incredibly diverse. And I love that he had to play a supportive role, but then he also could take the focal point of a soloist, and it was like super impactful. But I also had influences like, Meshuggah, which is a Swedish metal band. And
I know them very well. Thomas Hawke was a dear friend of mine, and we had many events together and lessons together for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, Thomas is a great guy. So I feel Meshuggah made like one of the most impactful contributions to modern metal that I can think of. And so my guitar playing pulls a lot from even his drumming as far as like what I want to hear, but also Frederick Thorntonall, their guitar player, just, him, Vi, and Petrucci were playing 7-string guitars, and they were kind of like at the forefront of that before bands like Korn and Limp Bizkit and stuff like that. So that pushed me into extended range. But I also had musical influences like Radiohead and Bjork, and even stuff like the Bad Plus, this is a jazz trio. They would cover all sorts of cool, they do trio, renditions of Blondie or Nirvana or, Black Sabbath, but like in a traditional jazz setting. So sorry, that's kind of like the amalgam, of all the guys.
Well, you are reaping from all the planets in the universe, which I love. It's such deep. And you mentioned Steve Vai. Steve Vai is like a philosopher. When I interviewed him, it was just so great to hear his deep philosophy of life and all the deep books he's read. So what you're hearing out of his music is that powerful philosophy coming through every note he plays.
Yeah, Steve is an extremely developed individual. It's like, I think if you ever have a chance to meet him or interact with him, and like you have, it's like you understand that the music is part of this larger thing. Like he as a consciousness is like at this point where you hear the music, you're like, oh, it makes sense that this guy made this music, because he thinks so deeply about things, and he's connected to the source of creativity, or just being aligned with conscious manifestation of ideas. And it's it's super impactful.
And just on top of that, a great guy. And as all we can talk about, even like Paul Gilbert. Paul Gilbert has an incredible online school that he teaches, that he's producing all these great guitar players. So here you are pulling from these players, you're taking all this information. So now you're starting to write, and you're starting to put together Animals as Leaders. How'd that all come about?
Animals as Leaders was the solo project that Prosthetic wanted to put out. I just decided to call it Animals as Leaders as opposed to like the TOSIN ABASI experience or whatever. That basically is what Animals as Leaders is. It's like a musical context for me to do virtually whatever I want on the guitar.
Yeah. So you put this first album together, you've got some incredible success with it. Then you write Weightless. How'd that come about?
It was just a follow-up album, and it was kind of nerve-wracking because the first album, the self-titled Animals as Leaders album, it kind of like had a kind of a serious impact in some ways, in this sort of subgenre of online metal guitarists doing home production, and I don't know, it was like this obscure sort of subgenre of metal that some people call gent, but so Weightless was. There's an interesting thing that can happen if you write an album, maybe it's your first one and people really relate to it. There are expectations for your second album to exceed it, or, sometimes people just want you to continue doing the thing you did on the first effort. And I remember for the first time feeling all those not so positive pressures. But Weightless was cool. We did it, as a band. Our drummer at the time, Naveen, he produced it, and Javier, our guitarist, mixed it. And it was just like, I'm like really into science fiction and stuff, and Weightless is kind of like this one word that for me conceptualizes like non-terrestrial experiences. Yeah.
Any space travel, you've got Weightless. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. So from Weightless, then you go into the Joy of Motion.
Yeah. Joy of Motion, we returned to working with Misha Mansour of Periphery. He produced the first album with me. And the Joy of Motion was, I think, in some ways, a conscious turn back towards some of the energy of the first album. Music is actually like a phenomena that takes place in real time. Like sound is actually a frequency, and this is like a repetitive wave. And to even produce music, you have to physically manipulate something in real time. And it just made me think of like motion, the joy of motion. Music can be this like actual experience of real time phenomena. Even like the way you register sound is a physical phenomena that occurs in real time, and the rhythm is the division of time, and frequency is the division of like sound waves. So it just made me think of like physics and like music being this sort of coherent celebration of physical forces. And so the joy of motion was kind of like a loosely conception of like all that stuff. Yeah.
Well, you've made it motion and emotion, because that's really kind of what happened after it, which was a phenomenal album. So the next, The Madness of Many. So that was kind of like the next level of what you were building with this catalog.
Yeah, that was fun to do because it was, I think, the most collaborative effort between specifically the three band members, Matt Garska and Javier Reyes, and to the point where we even had Matt, the drummer, he composed kind of these drum compositions that we wrote harmony to second to the actual song already existing in rhythmic form. So it's kind of a reverse process, because normally we would conceive of the music on the guitar first. You'd have some melodic and rhythmic, foundation, and then the drummer would play what you expect to hear over the phrases I would give him, more or less. Yeah. But we inverted that process, and it resulted in some cool ideas. And I would say The Madness of Many might be our most bold. Like, we didn't really try to go for necessarily like catchy or hooky, not always. We kind of were like, we went into some darker, more sort of complex musical territory on that album. And we tried to encapsulate, I forget what was going on at the time. It's like the world seemed crazy at that time, but saying that now seems kind of
it's almost a bit crazy, because the world is crazier now, for sure.
Absolutely. But I remember at the time wanting to kind of invoke some of the energy of, this is like the early rise of certain political things, and it felt a certain way. So yeah.
Well, I'll tell you something. Well, maybe the next album will be The Madness of Many More.
I hope not. Yeah, it'll be The Aliens Are Here. Volume 1.
So here you are. You're putting this together. You're organizing this. Listen, this means you've got to be a leader. You're wearing several hats now and organizing this and putting this together, and you're composing, you're arranging, and you're working with people like Matt. Matt is a phenomenal drummer and a phenomenal composer, and composition, that he plays on his instruments is absolutely brilliant. So you're surrounding yourself, great musicians, you're putting this together. How are you organizing this stuff? Would you consider yourself to be a disciplined person?
Yeah, I am disciplined, but it's in a very undisciplined way. Like, I think I have the ability to hyper focus, but I don't have the ability to decide what I want to hyper focus on. So I will sit and practice for hours, but I'm not the most organized person when it comes to like, my emails or something like that. Or like, I got into physical fitness pretty heavily for a few years, and I was just hyper focused. I'm learning everything about Olympic lifts, and I'm working out, 5-6 times a week. And I'm, fortunately with Animals as leaders in most bands, you get someone who is really good and conscientious, like a manager or your booking agents or your label, and it allows you to just focus on the creative parts. And I definitely am someone who delegates stuff out, because I'm not really good with spreadsheets and dates and all that stuff.
Well, you start putting this all together, and then you're evolving in it. 2011, you come up with Tram. So you start to put together a whole nother level of musicians together, and go to this other project. How did that all come about?
Yeah, Tram, I discovered a few jazz musicians when I was in music school, and they started to really influence my playing. Guys like Kurt Rosenwinkel and Jonathan Kreisberg and Adam Rogers, really pushing bebop into, I think, what I would consider kind of a progressive area where it wasn't just straight up swing sort of bebop. A lot of say the head of the song would be a very distinct rhythmically accented phrase, and then you'd have maybe odd meter, and you'd maybe have some harmony that definitely was outside of the normal canon of bebop. These guys were using symmetrical scales, and they were using things that I wasn't hearing in traditional jazz, and they had some physical facility that would rival some of the shredders we were just talking about earlier. So I think the combination of advanced harmony with a lot of the physical technique that guys like, Jonathan Kreisberg or Adam Rogers have, it was like the perfect combination for me. So Tram was like, I started writing this stuff that wasn't heavy enough to be Animals as Leaders. It wasn't like metal. It was definitely in a more jazz direction. And there was a drummer, Eric Moore, who I had been seeing clips of, and I was just like, dude.
I played on many festivals with Eric in all around the world, in Spain and Australia and here in the US. And he really is a real special talent.
Yeah, he is a force. He's an actual force. And so it was cool. Eric ended up playing drums on the album. And honestly, we just let him just solo like constantly. And then there's a guy, Adrian Terrasas, he played flute and sax and clarinet. And it was the first time I worked with like a woodwind player to actually work with the guitar lines. It was cool. We had a lot of fun with that project, and it was like just this detour away from the progressive metal thing to do more of like a progressive fusion album.
Well, it almost comes down to like instrumental progressive bop or instrumental progressive jazz, if you want to even, that's kind of, how you've molded this.
Yeah. I don't always think of a genre, but I definitely pull from them. And so I kind of like this sort of open-ended approach. Like you start with a seed of some ideas, but then the end result can even surprise you. And I think Tram was kind of like that.
Absolutely, man. So on the creative side, you've got a real good handle on the creative side. Here you are, writing, composing, putting together, certain key musicians that are inspiring you to write, whether it's in a metal mentality or whether it's in a jazz or a bop way. You're really kind of allowing yourself to open up. You have to organize all this. You got to talk to labels. So there's a business side that's got to be balanced. So if we balance the artistic side and we balance the business side, how do you keep that balance floating?
Fortunately, I've had a pretty seamless experience with the musical endeavors. Like the label that put out Animals as Leaders stuff put out Tram, and it was as simple as saying, hey, I've got this idea for a side project, and they were like, great, we'd love to do it. And so it was seamless. And Tram wasn't super active as far as touring, so I didn't have to worry about the logistics of, coordinating a whole new touring regime for a different band. All of the business stuff, I try to get people who excel at that to really manage the logistics behind the scenes, because it's not really what I want to be doing per se, because I just want to be making music and performing it, you know what I mean? Yeah. And all of these are passion projects, so there isn't even it's not like I'm conceiving of like, what the world needs right now is a progressive jazz album and it should have this personnel. It's not really a strategized thing. It's kind of like, look, I got 4 songs already, and like, it'd be great to have this guy play on it, and we just kind of make it happen. You know what I mean?
Well, it sounds like there is a strategy. The difference is the strategy is you following your gut and your instinct.
Yeah, which is something that has worked really well. I even find that I don't know if this happens to you in musical products you play in, but like, you almost try to predict what the listener wants to hear, and it can become a kind of like looking glass effect where you're not necessarily like playing anything you want. You're kind of editing what your musical ideas, because you have an idea of the listener liking some things more than the other. And it can be a trap sometimes, because you can misdiagnose what you think people want to hear, or you can sound like you're actually trying to play for people in a way that isn't the same as playing for yourself and having people love what you're playing. And so strategy can be useful, but sometimes I don't like when I hear formula in bands, like when I can tell that they made deliberate choices for, You know what I mean?
Yeah, if there's thought process, preconceived thought process, that sounds a little bit contrived.
Mm-hmm.
It loses the moment or being in the now.
Exactly.
In that now, there's got to be spontaneity. There's got to be, creativity that's on the edge of the moment. That's really where the magic begins. And that's a lot of what you do, which I think is pretty powerful.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a constant struggle to separate yourself from expectation and to be on the edge of even your own creative voice, But it's something that like I'm committed to attempting. So.
Well, you're committed for sure because of what you're doing is really producing some great quality music. But now the balance of the business side. So here you are now. You're creative. You've got that whole machine going. You've got these great players, and now all of a sudden you've got the designing of guitars that you want to come up with something that might have a little different sound or a little different look, and you've got stuff hanging on the walls. The Ibanez, Tam 100, and you've got and the Abasi concepts. Just talk a little bit about that. How that. Because now you've stepped into the business world of design. That's a whole nother area.
Yeah, it's a whole other area. So I'll grab.
Show me what you got. Let's see what you got. Let's see.
All right. So I was an Ibanez endorsee for a very long time, and it's. I remember just I bought a Steve Vai Universe at a point, and it was like my prized possession. It was like the best 7-string you could get, and all of my favorite guys were either Ibanez guys at a point or they were currently Ibanez guys. So you had, Petrucci had Ibanez days, Gambale had Ibanez days, Paul Gilbert, Pat Metheny, John Schofield. It's kind of insane, Vai, Satch. So anyway, I ended up working with Ibanez for quite a few years, and they made some incredible stuff. But this was like the first signature guitar that I ever had. It's an 8-string, and it's cool. I tried to do, I don't know how well it's coming up on camera, but
beautiful.
Yeah. So the only thing with this is that it essentially was just it's an extended range guitar that basically just adds strings to a traditional guitar, right? So I was beginning to feel like you could do more once you start adding strings, you introduce some design issues that I think require you to maybe work from the ground up as opposed to just taking an existing guitar and just adding strings. And so I remember convincing Ibanez to let me design something from the ground up. And I kind of came up with this shape because I had come to own a few custom guitars that were built by luthiers, and they were taking an ergonomic approach. So the shape of the guitar is kind of conceived in a way that's meant to benefit your interaction with the guitar.
This is like a fine-tuned sports car. It's beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really into supercars actually, and even things like Porsche and McLaren. And I love when design form meets function. So whether it's aerodynamics informing the shape of a car or ergonomics informing the shape of a guitar. So we did some things like having this continuous bevel. It allows for your form to kind of sit a bit more flush on the body. It reduces mass at points on the body, makes it thinner. It has a really cool aesthetic effect. We also went with multi-scale. So if you notice the distance between the
frets.
Yeah, it actually has this fanning sort of thing. It's because the lower strings are actually a longer scale length than the treble strings. So it allows for like the correct amount of tension on your low notes and not too much tension on your treble notes, because basically you could look at something like a violin and then a cello and then an upright bass, and relative to the range of frequency that instrument wants to play, there is like a sweet spot of like how long the actual strings are, So the lower the note, the more you benefit from a longer string. On an extended range guitar, I'm tuning as low as a bass, and so having a traditional scale length that's on like a Stratocaster or something is too short for how low that note is. So the multi-scale thing is literally multi-scales. It has a longer scale length for the lowest notes. And then as you get to the treble notes, the scale length gets shorter to a traditional guitar length. And so to me, that was something that was an absolute must for an extended range guitar. And then, I like thin neck profiles. We even narrowed the string spacing a little bit. Fishman developed some new pickup technology called the Fluence. So, this guitar is basically my attempt to design an 8-string from the ground up that is easier to play than any 8-string you'll encounter, whether you're doing super technical lead work or playing rhythm stuff. You're going to get a complementary response from the guitar. And then the pickups these are new. At the time, they've been around for a few years, but the Fluence technology is a new approach to voicing the guitar. And then even things like the neck of this guitar is actually set quite deep into the body. This actually reduces the overall width perceptually when you're playing, because it feels like the neck is actually kind of shoved a bit deeper into the body of the guitar. So it's a smaller footprint in general. So yeah, sorry if that was rambling, but
not at all. What I enjoyed, I want the listeners to understand, is the depth of engineering that has to go into the thought process. What you've done actually is not much unlike what Bosendorfer did to the piano, where they added 100 keys, and that had to extend the length of the piano because of the length of the strings, and they had to kind of redesign how they delivered this concept of adding more notes and more keys to the piano, the acoustic piano. So this is really engineering. So do you have any design background at all?
Not officially, but I'm into, I think design is a type of noticing of complementary elements that exist, but maybe not at the same time, and your ability to combine them in new ways. So, you could look at how, clothing, there's a ton, you can walk into a store and there's a ton of clothing you can choose for yourself, but you make individual choices that cohere to hopefully communicate some of your personality and your identity and what you're into. And so I think design is kind of all around us. My brother Abdul has a menswear label, and he kind of started to get me into clothing as a means of actual conceptual design, something meaningful. And then I really like we mentioned, cars. I think you could drive on the street and you'll see a bunch of cars, and then if you see a Lamborghini, your brain's gonna go there's just something about this object that is more impactful than these other objects. And it's even as basic as Apple, what they did for the way a computer or phone looks. They kind of had this minimal, elegant sort of very clean, deliberate approach to it. So more of the story is I think I was influenced by all these things, and it's important for me to feel like the instrument I'm playing has an open enough connotation for what I want to get through it. If I'm playing an SG or something, it's very different than if I'm playing one of these Abasi guitars. It's the instrument, I think in some ways, influences what comes out of you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I bet if that was a trap kit with brushes and a tiny kick drum and felt beater, you're going to play completely different stuff,
Absolutely. And what this does is that the design of what you've done is really has allowed you to be more, intuitive. I think that intuitive sense, which is really what Apple designed with the iPhone, which is really what Lamborghini has done. They built an intuitiveness to the feel that when you get into it, you are really a part of that machine.
Yeah, that's really hard to do. So I think there's two tiers of design. There is the aesthetic design, where you can look at an object, and whether it's through palette or texture or form, there's a communication of an idea. Now, design of a tool, whether it's a phone or a laptop or a guitar, there's a layer of design there that is actually not always aesthetic. It's more about interface, how does it feel to use this tool? And the word intuitive is a great word, because it's kind of you know already. If it's intuitive, it's as if you've designed something that without much thought, someone can utilize that tool and they don't have to learn much. It intuitively works with them. And so I think for the guitar, that type of intuition comes from, in a lot of ways, how it's shaped. Like how accessible are all of the frets, or like where are the angles of the body? Where does the guitar, where does it want to sit? Where does it want to rest? And, I really think the sports car, supercar thing is like the best example for me, because there's a precision, to the steering rack, and there is an immediacy to the throttle, and there is a rigidity to the chassis. And all of this is so that whatever way you want to change direction is unimpeded by the actual car. It's all facilitating your thoughts to direct the car. And so I really wanted to make the Ferrari of guitars, where you could go faster, easier, and you look great doing it.
Well, I tell you, you've done it. Being a drummer myself, I'm looking at those guitars that you have up there, and I want to find out, is it in standard or automatic? Where can I get one? Because I want to ride that son of a gun.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lot of fun.
It's awesome.
Well, good for you. Now, let me ask you about social media. I mean, to try to balance all this and keep this going on, and are you involved with social media where you can allow fans of yours to be involved in what you're doing, and get the message out?
Yeah, and yes, but in the most basic way of just having, an Instagram and having a YouTube and having a Facebook, and using that as a primary way of just communicating with my fans. So I'm pretty candid with most of my social media. I'll be in this room making mistakes of what I'm working on, and I'll just post it, and I just let people see it, because social media has given us access to a type of behind the scenes thing with some of our favorite artists in a way that traditional press, it didn't go down like that. And so I love to see what Steve Vai's working on the guitar, what Paul Gilbert is finding interesting these days when he sits down to play, or what Al Di Meola is cooking in the kitchen lately.
He's cooking some great things, just like Steve Vai's brother has an Italian restaurant. Absolutely, man. I want to get involved in all that.
Yeah, and I actually think there's a lot of guitarists learning to play from social media. So I really connect with the me that was learning back in the day. And so I keep my social media pretty low key. So it's not a ton of curated content. It's pretty throw and go. But it seems like a really a living sort of relationship with the fans. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, man. Well, I'll tell you something. As we get deeper into what you're doing, you're balancing a lot of things. And I think this is very healthy for this younger generation, which is what the message of the Sessions panel and these interviews are about. But capturing the story so we can share this and people can be inspired by learning what you're doing, how you're doing it, and how you've built your career and how you maintain your career. I think this is an extremely important part of the ongoing process of being involved in this crazy business that we're in. What would you say in closing, Joseph? What would you say in closing to a younger generation that is a fan of what you're doing? They want to learn, they want to go out and play. What would you say to that next generation and how they can tap into their passion in this music industry?
I would say, if you're learning, don't be discouraged by the fact that there are people who are better than you, because that is A, the better than you part isn't always useful, and B, technically there's always someone quote unquote better if you're using some sort of metric of how fast you can do it or how cleanly you can do it. And maybe those metrics aren't that useful, and you should start focusing on what are the unique contributions you make through your instrument that are as distinct as your actual voice or your face, your fingerprint. There is a part of you that is unique to you that isn't competitive, but is definitely authentic. And so maybe using that as a compass through your development to understand that it's not really a competitive thing as much as it is a way of expressing who you are and developing that over time through your instrument. I think there can be a type of information overload. So if you're learning, try not to go down rabbit holes of hyperlinks until you forgot where you started, and you're on the Hungarian minor scale when you were just trying to learn Little Wing, whatever the case is. It's very easy to do that. And so I think just be patient with yourself and be empathetic and value your individuality, because I think ultimately that will be the thing that cuts through the noise, is your distinct voice. So, yeah.
Well, great advice, Tosin. It really is fantastic to have some time with you to capture a little bit of the insides working of what you're doing and in your guitar vault there, which is nice to kind of visit to see all that you have. You have done fantastic, and as Guitar World had ranked you in the top 100 greatest guitarists. This is a pretty serious commitment of a career that you've made in the course of your life, which is really, really powerful.
Right on. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
I thank you so much on behalf of the sessions. We have these interviews that are out there to inspire, to educate, to enrich. This really is incredible to reach people at this level. I thank you so much for your time. Tosin, please stay safe, and I look forward to meeting you in person.
Right on. Looking forward to it.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Dom Famularo here, the Sessions panel. This is so exciting. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Click the subscribe button to be a part of what we're doing. The views help us tremendously. All of your comments, we read them and react to them. This is incredible. The support you're giving us is great. The Sessions panel. We'll see you real soon.